Hey, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Slay the Spire the board game video, and today we're doing a tier list and breakdown of the Ironclad cards. As always, the goal of this series is not to highlight quote-unquote the best or worst cards, but rather to share my thought process and analysis and some tips on when it might be best to pick or skip those cards. And without further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, so finally we're talking all about the rare cards of Ironclad, all the golden, the shiny, the exciting stuff. I already prepared my ranking board with all cards sorted alphabetically as always, but before I start, just a quick note how the way I approach my ranking in general. As always, I rank them not based on the abstract power level of the cards, but instead I rank based on how often do I tend to skip or pick those cards, which as you can imagine is quite a different thing. For example, on the S tier would be a card that I'm pretty much always happy to pick regardless of what act I am, whether it's act 1, act 2, act 3, regardless of which build I'm going for. Whenever I see a card on the S tier, I'm always like, yes, 100% taking it. And in contrast to that, a card on the F tier would be something I'm pretty much always skip, again regardless of whatever build I'm going for, etc, etc. Now, those cards on the F tier are not necessarily bad per se, but usually just they're either too exotic or too finicky, or just the value for me is not quite there to justify having that particular card in my deck. With that out of the way, let's start as always alphabetically, so we're going with the Barricade. It's a power 4/2 energy. At the start of turn, keep your leftover block from last turn, and as a reminder, max block is 20, and if you upgrade it, it becomes a 1 cost to discard, so it costs only 1 energy instead of 2. And so the way block works in this game, just in case you're not familiar with it, is that you gain all the block throughout during your turn, then enemies may or may not attack you depending on their moveset, and then at the start of your next turn, any block that is left over is normally reduced down to 0. But with this power you can keep everything that is left over, and you can keep all the block potentially all the way up all the 20, and you stay there at that 20 block, which is the maximum you can have. And I would say this card alone enables one of the core Ironclad archetypes, one of its build, kind of the tank build or the block build, where you're trying to stay with as much block as you can, keeping everything that is left over, and then just smash it everyone with body slam, trying to repeat this card as often as you can. And that is a very valid strategy, a viable strategy of winning even in a very high ascension. So I do like this card, but there is of course a problem that it doesn't really do anything on its own. It's definitely 100% an enabler for those great things, but you do need to have a lot of other things to actually make it work, namely some decent block cards in the first place to get all of this block that you can keep. Otherwise you just won't be able to keep up with the enemy's damage, and they will just remove all of your block from their attacks anyway. So this is an amazing card, really one of the probably best enablers, one of the most unique twists of Ironclad for sure, and purely power wise this would be an S tier. But again, because I'm ranking not based on power but based on whether I pick this card or not, this would likely be a B tier. I think there are just a lot of things to consider. If this is a very first card reward, I would very likely skip this one. I think there's just too many things to consider, and it's just not that helpful on its own unless you have already all the other elements in play, or at least some other just decent good block cards that you can reliably have more block than the enemies attack you. So that's just my hot take. I know it's maybe very popular opinion. I can imagine some people might rank it higher, but for me that would be a good average card, again based on how often I pick it, not quite on its power level. Now moving on to the next one, we have Berserk. It's another power for 1 energy. Whenever you exhaust a card, deal 1 damage to any row, and if you upgrade it, you deal 2 damage to any row instead. Now oftentimes whenever you play a power, you're losing a lot of momentum, because generally many powers they're quite expensive, and you only on the next turns you usually get some values. But with Berserk, not only it's relatively cheap, I mean it's worth energy, but also you can get this effect that whenever you exhaust a card you deal 1 damage to any row. You can already get this effect on the very turn you put this power in play. So I like it, and obviously I do like row damage. This is very helpful in so many scenarios, of course against some elites and bosses as well. Just lots of good use cases for this card. My main consideration that I'm taking into account whether to pick this card or not is sort of similar to Barricade, is that this card doesn't do pretty much anything on its own. It's again one of those enablers enablers that whenever you exhaust a card, you deal more damage, but unless you have a ways of consistently exhausting a lot of cards, you just won't get pretty much any value out of this card. So this is an amazing pick if you have your already kind of exhausting engine going very smoothly and reliably and consistently exhaust a lot of cards and draw more cards and all of that, which usually, may or may not even happen towards the late game. Definitely not something I would pick early, and only if I already have some other key components of this whole thing. So probably be another B tier. Could be even C. Not sure. Yeah, I think B would still be very likely. Because even without the whole entire kind of exhaust build, I do tend to pick at least a couple of exhausting cards. So it's not that bad. It's never fully dead card in my hand. Though if I would see this as a potential very fast reward, I would very likely skip it. Now, moving on next, we have Bludgeon. This is attack for 3 energy, 7 damage, and if you upgrade it, it's gonna deal nice juicy 10 damage, but again for the cost of 3 energy. Now 7 or let alone 10 damage is often enough to defeat some minions, especially 10 damage is a good breakpoint for defeating pretty much the majority of minions for sure. But I mean the cost of 3 energy is a lot. It's naturally your entire energy unless you have some boss relics or other sources of additional energy. So basically unless you have all those things, that's your entire energy. You deal 7 or 10 damage and that's it. You cannot block any damage, you cannot deal anything else. So is it worth it? And based on my experience, not so much so, I would say. And my probably even main problem with this card is actually not it's even the cost, but the fact that it doesn't scale well. I mean, imagine you having, all the strength buffs all the way up to 8, and if you have 8 buffs and you have even upgraded Bludgeon, it will still deal 18 damage, which is exactly enough how a Twin Strike would deal, being just a common 1 cost energy cost card. So this is why I'm personally not too big fan of Bludgeon. It's not something you can scale too well, and it's just too expensive overall. So I usually tend to skip this card. I mean, I'm not disliking it too much. It's not something I would absolutely skip, but not something I would pick too often either. I mean, it could be an F tier, frankly, but I mean, in the early game, that's still quite fun. But yeah, once again, not something I would pick too often. Speaking of that though, we have next Corruption. It's a power for 3 energy. Your skills cost 0 energy. Whenever you play a skill, you exhaust it. And on the upgraded side, it costs 2 energy instead. So even though this power costs a lot, either 2 or 3 energy, once you put this in play, you can then do so much. I think it is 100% one of those enablers that enable a complete whole different play style for Ironclad that is normally just not accessible, that you can exhaust any skill for 0 energy and all skills they cost 0. So you can play potentially even your entire hand if you have that many skills potentially, and that is honestly quite crazy. Now you do have to be a little cautious with this card, that unless you have some other components of this whole engine, namely Dark Exchange, Dark Embrace, you cannot fully rely on this Corruption alone, but once you have those 2 cards together, and ideally even feel no pain as well, then it becomes so satisfying to just scroll through your entire deck, playing all those skills for 0 cost, exhausting them, just lots and lots of synergy. This is absolutely fantastic card. I'm absolutely happy to pick this as my first reward, even potentially as a late game, even if I'm going for something completely different. I don't have a lot of exhaust kind of synergies in my deck specifically. I would still likely pick Corruption because I still do have usually some skills that cost on average more than 2 or 3, so the value of Corruption still, I mean the cost of putting Corruption in place still usually on average gives more value overall, even if I don't have a lot of exhaust mechanics. So fantastic card, such a great strong enabler, and yep, that is an S tier shenanigans definitely. Moving on next, we have a Demon Form. It's a power for 3 energy at the start of turn, gain strength, and if you upgrade it, it costs 2 energy, and yep. That is a very classic example of a power that not only it's very expensive to put this in play, which means you're typically losing a lot of momentum on the turn you actually playing the card, but also you're not even gaining any benefit on the turn you playing it. It's only on the start of the next turn, so it's a very slow card. And that is my main problem with this. Even though strength buffs is usually great, you can scale something like Heavy Blade to, talking about 40 plus damage or 80 plus with vulnerable, so that is a lot of damage. That is how at least one of the reliable ways of defeating a lot of bosses and elites. So strength buffs is good, but Demon Form is just too slow in my opinion. You just, the cost opportunity of playing the card is too high. Even when you upgrade it for 2 energy, that is still a lot. Even if you do get a boss relic, so you have 4 energy instead of 3, and you upgrade the card for 2, you know, maybe then it's alright to play this card, kinda not as punishing, but still you just gain 1 strength on the next turn, which is still just too slow. So I know this might be not popular opinion, and I'm pretty sure you will let me know about this in the comments, but for me Demon Form would be an F tier, yes. It's just too punishing to put this in play, it's too slow, and there are just way better ways of gaining more strength buffs for fewer amount of energy and safer, and yeah, sorry Demon Form, I do like it. And I can understand why it might be very appealing. I mean, it's a passive scaling, right? It's the best as you can have, but the cost opportunity is too high, and yeah, sorry Demon Form. Moving on, next we have Double Tap. It's a skill for 1 energy. This turn your next attack is played twice, and if you upgrade it, it costs 0 energy. Yeah, now we're talking about. It's effectively a reusable attack potion, something you can repeat over and over, especially if you upgrade it for 0 energy, is an absolute amazing. You can repeat cards something like Heavy Blade or Body Slam or Immolate. Just so many good cards you can repeat and play over and over. Your attack is played twice, is twice as damage, that was as good as you can have really. It is slightly awkward as a very fast reward, since you naturally don't have a lot of good cards. Probably Bash is the only thing you can play twice. Even that is not too bad really. But once you get more cards, something like even Cleave, you know, dealing 6 damage for 1 energy is not too bad. So Double Tap, yes, this is the card I'm always happy to have. That would be an absolutely S tier for sure. Moving on, next we have Exhume. It's a skill for 1 energy. Put a card from your exhaust pile into your hand, then exhaust, and if you upgrade it, it costs 0 energy. So it basically gives a second life to any of your exhaust cards. You return them back to your hand and then you can play them again. And naturally, because a lot of really powerful cards, they are exhaust, so this just gives more power, more flexibility to all some of the really strongest cards really, and you can play this again. Now, similar to Barricade and Berserk, this is a little bit awkward in the early game while you don't have any cards that are go to the exhaust pile in the first place, so you do need to have at least a couple of cards, or you know, even at least 1 card that go to the exhaust pile before you can actually play Exhume, otherwise it would do absolutely nothing. So it's a little awkward as an early pick. Maybe I would probably avoid this throughout the entire Act 1, although of course it depends on the rewards, but overall I do like the flexibility that you can return any exhaust card from the exhaust pile back to your hand and play this again. It's just so much flexibility, so much things you can do that normally you just cannot do without the card. So it's one of those little enablers that allow you to do some things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So yeah, Exhume, it does rely on having other cards in your deck, but I will probably put this maybe on the A tier. No, I think I'll still go this on the B, simply because these other cards I would likely skip on the Act 1, because they do rely on having other cards already in your deck before you can actually gain any value from this. For this reason, and frankly only this reason, I'm not ranking this higher, but obviously once you have some really good cards, then you can return them and play them again. This becomes super strong. That would potentially, like this, the value and the kind of the strength of the effect can absolutely be an S tier 100%. Moving on, next we have Feed. It's an attack for 1 energy. If it kills the enemy, you gain strength buffs, and then exhaust, and on the upgraded side you gain 2 strengths. So purely power wise, 1 energy, 3 damage is not as great. Obviously the main kind of gimmick, the main feature of this card is that you gain strength, potentially even 2 strength if this kills the enemy, but as you can imagine, my main problem with this card is mostly in single enemy fights. You know, some bosses, some elites, you basically never get this effect because there's no minions to kill or anything of that sort, in which case it basically becomes just slightly better than a normal strike. So for this reason, I'm not too huge of this card. I mean, it can be quite fun if you get this as a very first reward, and you can slightly easier go through Act 1, you know, if you get lucky, if the timing is right and you get this card at the right moment, when this can be actually the last finisher to finish off the enemy to gain strength. But you know, even that can be slightly awkward sometimes. You do need to be a bit lucky to actually make it work. So for this reason, could be either a C or F tier, and honestly likely C. It's still not as bad as Demon Form in my opinion. You still can get at least couple of strength, you know, potentially even on turn 1 if you get, you know, again a little luck, but I cannot rank this higher than that because it's just not usable. The main feature of this card is not helping you at all on single enemy fights. Moving on, next we have Fiend Fire. exhaust your hand, deal 1 damage for each other card exhausted this way, and exhaust this card itself. And on the upgraded side, you're gonna deal 2 damage instead of 1. So exhausting your hand, sounds as brutal as it is. And just as a quick reminder, here in the board game, unlike in the video game, there is no hand limit. So potentially, if you have a bunch of draw effects, you can have your hand as all the way, up to 15 or whatever the number of cards you can potentially draw. Again, there is no limit whatsoever. And then if you play this card, yeah, you get that much damage. And this is potentially one of probably the most hard-hitting card in the entire game. I actually haven't done the maths, but just looking at this, even if you exhaust, let's say, 10 cards and you have 8 strength buffs, which is totally possible to get on Ironclad. And of course, if you take into account vulnerable, which doubles that damage, then we're talking about really hundreds, plural hundreds of damage. I don't think there is many, or if any card can deal that much damage. So yeah, this is potentially one of the most craziest things you can play in a game. Obviously, it scales really well with strength buffs, and it also synergizes well with some exhaust effects, even though not all of them. But despite being that ridiculously powerful, it's sometimes a little bit awkward. Obviously, you exhausting your hand. You cannot cherry pick, certain cards, only exhausting some curses or statuses. It is your entire hand. So this is something to keep in mind. If you have some powers you would rather put in play than exhausting, or some attack cards that you would prefer to repeat, then just be mindful that Fiend Fire can play against you in that sense. But yeah, if all the stars align, this can be the most powerful card. How often do I pick it though? Probably not that often, to be honest. It's definitely something I consider as the late game card. I mean, you can technically play it even in Act 1, but it can be a little bit awkward if you exhaust and can burn too many cards. You would just end up having no cards, and yeah, it can be a bit messy in the early game unless you have other synergies, other ways of kind of dealing with those things. So yeah, this would probably be a C tier for me, even though full acknowledging that this is potentially the strongest card in the entire game, but it's not something I would probably pick, especially not in Act 1, or potentially if I'm going to another build and I don't want to exhaust all my hand. So there is just a lot of consideration before picking this card. This is why it would be on the C tier for me. I mean, it could be B, but I think it's just a little bit too kind of edge casey, a bit more situational compared to other cards on the B tier. So there you have it. Now moving on, next we have Immolate. It's an attack for 2 energy, deals 5 raw damage, and then apply 2 daze to you, so 2 debuffs, and then if you upgrade it, it's gonna be 7 damage. Now 5 or let alone 7 raw damage, that is a lot. That is often enough to defeat all at least little minions in the entire row, or if not defeat, then at least weaken them, and then maybe they have just a couple of HP left that you can then finish off with other things. So even though that debuff, that effectively means on the next turn you'll be without 2 other cards on your draw, that's kind of another way of thinking about this, I think still it's worth it playing pretty much all the time, or I should rather say most of the time. There are still some cases where you need to be a little cautious whenever you play this card, but of course if you have other cards like Evolve or Fire Breathing, that becomes just an absolute S+, because not only you deal all of the damage, but you also then deal additional damage whenever you draw those cards, and then deal more raw damage. It's just pure chaos becomes that. But honestly, even without them, that is still a card I'm absolutely happy to have pretty much all the time. If you get this as a very first reward in Act 1, you can just absolutely breeze through the entire act, and in Act 2 it's still ridiculously helpful. There are just so many minion fights as well, and frankly even in Act 3. So yeah, this card is really good throughout the entire game for all those elite fights with minions and some bosses as well. It's just there's a lot of them. So despite the debuff, that's still really good. Pretty much always happy to have it. Moving on, next we have Impervious. It's a skill for 2 energy, you gain 6 block and then exhausted, and if you upgrade it, it's gonna be 8 block. Now in most cases that would be a little bit an overkill. You just don't need that much block, probably all the way until Act 3. Frankly, I don't think even Act 2 bosses deal that much damage, even though yeah, there are a couple of, well, I would say okay, until the Act 2 bosses you don't need that much amount of block. That said though, it is still an amazing card in just so many ways. It can be an absolute lifesaver against certain elites, against certain bosses, and I just cannot count how many times it actually saved and makes the difference between losing the entire run and winning. I'm talking about the hard fight, all the elite fights, particularly in Act 3. You're just gonna have a much easier time surviving the game if you have this card. So even though it is exhaust, you can potentially bring it back with something like Exhume. This is why Exhume is an amazing flexibility, which I appreciate a lot, but even from Impervious, which can be slightly awkward pick in Act 1 simply because you just don't need that much block, and spending 2 energies sounds like a little bit an overkill, but still nevertheless always taking it whenever I see this, just knowing how useful it will be in Act 3 and 4 in particular. Moving on, next we have Juggernaut. It's a power for 2 energy. Whenever you gain block, deal 1 damage, and if you upgrade it, you deal 2 damage instead. Now, just to clarify a little bit from the rules perspective, whenever you gain block, it counts not the amount of block you gain, but rather the single instance of block. So for example, if you play against something like Impervious that you gain 6 block from a single card, that still counts as a single instance of gaining that much block, so with Juggernaut trigger only once from this card, which, you know, isn't too particularly exciting, I would say, but it does synergize so well with the exhaust build, specifically with Feel No Pain, that you gain block whenever you exhaust a card, and if you have this whole kind of engine going with Corruption and Dark Embrace and Feel No Pain, then this Juggernaut can easily become your main source of damage, even though this doesn't seem like much. Obviously, this Juggernaut works way better when you already have all those components in play, but even if you're not going for this specific exhaust shenanigans, let's say you go into something completely different, but you still naturally have at least some block cards in your deck, you still get quite a lot of value from this card, especially once you upgrade it. I mean, dealing 2 damage after every instance of getting block, this is still not too bad. Even in non-exhaust build shenanigans, even just normal, plain human level builds with Juggernaut, you still can do easily like extra 10-20 damage sometimes throughout the fight across the different turns. So the value of this card, I think, is fantastic, particularly when you upgrade it. It basically doubles the damage, so definitely worth upgrading it. And for this reason, I'll probably put this on the A tier. It's not something that enables the build on its own, but it's a fantastic addition to the exhaust build, and also just a good, overall very useful card in pretty much any build, for the most part at least. So that would be an A tier for me for Juggernaut. Moving on, next we have Limit Break. It's a skill for 1 energy, double your strength, to the reminder that you can have on up to maximum of 8, and then you exhaust it, and if you upgraded that, you can use this over and over again. It no longer exhausts. And so out of all strength buffs, I would say Limit Break is probably the easiest way to scale your strength if you're going for that specific archetype, ideally with something like Heavy Blade to follow it up with a big chunks of damage with that blade. The only problem naturally with Limit Break is that you need to have some strength in the first place, because this card doesn't do anything on its own, it only doubles what you already have, and so naturally if you don't have any, 0 times 2 is still 0. To me, it kind of falls under the same category of Berserk and Barricade and Exhume. It's a fantastic effect, a really strong effect, but it relies on having other cards already in your deck before you can actually get any value from this card. For this reason, that would probably be another B tier for me, even though full acknowledging that this is an amazing card, but it just doesn't do anything on its own, so it's a quite awkward early pick. It's, I'm not saying useless, but it's not as effective if you're not going for strength build, specifically if you don't have any other ways of gaining that strength in the first place. For example, if you're going for purely exhaust build without, you know, relying on scaling your damage, or if you're going for purely block build, you don't need that much. But overall, across all of the different ways of building up a strength, this is the shortest way of building up as quick as you can. For this reason, I quite like it, especially if you upgrade it so it becomes reusable. You can make some shenanigans with Headbutt when you play it. It goes to your discard pile, then you put it back into your draw pile, then you play any card that can draw that top card and you play again. So effectively you double on top of double. So basically you can go from 2 to 8 energy in just, I mean, from 2 to 8 power on the strength in just a single turn. This is why I like it so much, but other than that, yeah, it is a little bit awkward on its own. Moving on, next we have Offering, which is a skill for 0 energy, lose 1 HP, gain 2 energy, draw 3 cards, exhaust, and if you upgrade it, you draw 5 cards instead. Now, this card is an absolute dream. I always say that cards that just give 2 energy, or just give any energy for that matter on their own, are a little bit awkward because there is still a hidden opportunity that whenever you draw that card means you're not drawing another card that you could potentially draw. So sometimes it can be a little bit awkward way. You play a card that gives energy, but then you don't even have cards to spend that energy on. But with offering this problem is completely solved, because not only it gives extra energy, but you also draw a lot of cards, and actually 5 cards. This is just a ridiculous amount of draw, especially for a 0 cost card that also gives you energy. And yeah, even though it costs just 1 HP, specifically for Ironclad, this is not too much big of a deal because we can recover that lost health thanks to our innate ability. So offering is just a fantastic card. You gain so much momentum by playing the card. You can safely put some powers in play, or you can just do just a lot of things, drawing cards and having more energy is just everything you want pretty much in this game. More options to choose from and more resources to spend in all those options. This is just absolutely fantastic card. Definitely be an S tier and something I would consider upgrading very early on if possible. 100% one of the best cards of Ironclad. And last but not least, we have Uppercut. It's an attack for 2 energy, deals 3 damage, then vulnerable and weak. And if you upgrade it, it's gonna be 2 vulnerable instead. Now, for 2 energy, that is a lot of value. It deals more damage than our bash. It applies not only vulnerable, but also weaken, so it's effectively, you can, another way of thinking about all these weak effects, as it saves you potentially from either 1 or 3 damage, depending on the moveset of the enemy, whether it's a single hit or multi-hit with 3 individual hits. That's the way I always think about it with all these weak effects. So overall, fantastic value from this card to having all of these effects. Even though 2 energy, still sometimes not very easy to play this card, but especially once you upgrade it, you can have 2 vulnerables. That is just a lot of multiplications for your other follow-up attacks. I would say probably the only case where I would skip this card if I were playing with multiplayer and everyone already have a bunch of those effects. Maybe if I play with Silent and she has Terror and obviously a lot of weakens, and the same for other characters, maybe in that case I would consider skipping it, but for the most part I think the value of this card is really good. It's not something I would just automatically pick. I would still consider this, but probably as high as on A tier for sure. So yep, there you have it. That is my tier ranking and the tier list of all Ironclad Rare cards. And well, that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you find it helpful, and if you did, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really appreciate this as well. Now, in case you don't know, I have some other Slay the Spire videos already on the channel as well. Things like beginner guides, for example, how to beat all elites, or character specific guides where I go over the general archetypes and builds and synergies, and of course more videos coming up, so stay tuned for that. And well, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.